It's we can always put it on there right after. So again, guys, welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Addiction. It's been a while since we have done a show, and especially on Wednesdays. We had our guest today who was out of Canada. She's been on the show many times. We have Candace Platter, who got ill today and had to change her plans. However, Dr. Mike was planning on coming in anyway, and we decided, heck, we're going to do a show and we're going to talk about his book, which is called Psyhrink Fit. And it's Psyhrink Fit with, well, let's let him explain it. But anyway, Dr. Mike, thank you so much for being here, man. It's always a pleasure. I love having you in the studio, but again, we're still working on a studio. Brad and I had a really good meeting today. And hopefully here soon we will be in a studio again. But Dr. Mike, it's always a pleasure having you here with me.
Thanks, Al. And yeah, it has been a little while since we last met in this setting, and it's good to be with you again. I know I bump into you fairly regularly at the gym, where you and I are both focused on trying to improve our physical fitness.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that kind of dovetails a little bit into the topic that we might talk about today, which is fitness, but a broader view of it from my perspective. And I've written a book. I haven't published it yet. I'm still working out a few kinks and trying to see what I could do to get it ready to make it available to everyone. I've given a few copies to some friends and family, and I haven't given one to Al yet, but that's going to happen tomorrow, hopefully, if we bump into each other.
I will be at the gym. I will definitely be at the gym.
So the title of the book, and it's crossed out a little bit there because of just this is not ready for sale yet, but it says Psyhrink Fit, Psyhrink Fit. And it's a psychiatrist's thoughts on overall life fitness. So over the years, I'm a board certified general psychiatrist. So I've done a medical school, and I've done 4 years of psychiatric residency, was chief resident, and spent a lot of time on the faculty at the university, and spent a lot of time over the years teaching other doctors and residents and medical students. So I've had a good dose of experience in mental health discussions and education, and worked with a lot of patients over the years. And I have found myself over the years repeating myself. I hope not to do that too much tonight, but I found myself saying the same thing a lot to a lot of different people. And I thought I would try to condense some of those thoughts and offer it to people as my take on what it means to be fit for life. And being fit for life, or what I call Psyhrink Fit, is more than just being able to, spend a lot of time on the treadmill, or a lot of time on the stair stepper, or being able to bench press 300 pounds. I mean, those are all good things. But if our fitness is limited to that, we are still going to struggle with life. I mean, life has its challenges no matter how fit you are. It's kind of a bumpy road for all of us. And
Dr. Mike, can I pause you just for a second? When we're sitting here talking about fitness, you mentioned some things that we do at the gym, right, to keep our bodies somewhat fit.
Right.
However, this Psyhrink Fit and also the fitness, what we're talking about, can also work inside our heads as well, correct?
Right. So being, to use my term, to be Psyhrink Fit means more than just being fit at the gym. It means being fit for the challenges that life will throw your way. Shakespeare talked about the slings and arrows of unfortunate fortune, or something like that. I can't get the quote exactly offhand, but most of us have heard that, where he talks about life and the slings and arrows that life will throw at us. Those challenges can come in a variety of ways. You can lose a job, or you can lose a relationship, or you can lose health, or you can lose kind of a focus on what your life's about. So anyway, I address a variety of those things in this book. Let me just, if I may, just read off the table of contents so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. I start with just a description of the book. I talk about physical fitness. And physical fitness, I think you would agree with me, Al, is an important part of being fit. I look at you and I see a prime specimen. I mean, you're in good shape. You look good, and you put the rest of us at the gym to shame a little bit. So
I don't know about that, but thank you for
you
your
do
kind
great there. Part of that, so exercise is important, not just for the immediate effects, but exercise has a lot of positive mental health benefits as well. Exercise has been one of the things I have regularly recommended to patients over the years. And I'm not always recommending that they train for an Ironman competition or a marathon, but just being regularly active makes a big difference. And what that means to me is, if a person at my age in their 60s can walk, 10,000 steps a day, which has been a popular goal for a lot of people, there are positive effects from that, not just physically, but I think emotionally as well. When I prescribe an antidepressant to someone, it almost always comes with a recommendation to regularly engage in physical exercise. So I talk about that. The next chapter, I talk a little bit about healthy eating habits and the use of supplements. There's a lot that can be said, and a lot has been said about supplements. You can't turn the radio on. Do people still use a radio? You can't tune into anything.
I don't know, to be honest with you. Matter of fact, Brad and I was just speaking about that today, how radio is actually disappearing.
It's kind
More
of
people are
disappearing.
they're going to podcasts and
Yeah,
also the Sirius XM, right?
yeah. Everything's being streamed, but wherever you're getting your information, it's not very long before you hear some advertisement about a supplement that's going to really change your life. And I'm not anti-supplements. I do think that we need to be careful, and there's been plenty of studies done that show that sometimes what is claimed is not backed up by the science. Even the ingredients in a capsule that you might be taking may not match what the label says. The concentration may vary a little bit. And again, I'm not anti-supplements. I use some supplements myself. Certainly taking a multivitamin, I think, is a reasonable thing to do. There's a long list of supplements that we could talk about, and I'm not going to do all that right now. But all I would say is be cautious, use good stuff, get name brand stuff if you can. And I think it's good for your doctor to be aware of what you're taking. I think some people think that because it's not requiring a prescription that you don't need to tell the doctor about it, but some of these supplements really do interfere with other medications that you might be taking. Yeah. Like, as I recall, I think St. John's wort, which is a popular herbal remedy for depression, it may slow down the metabolism of birth control pills, or alter the metabolism in such a way that a person may end up with an unplanned pregnancy because of that. Or something as benign as grapefruit juice, which seems pretty healthy to me, but that also very clearly will alter the metabolism of a big group of drugs. It affects a certain enzyme in your liver that is important for metabolizing stuff. So anyway, I talk about that. Talk about sleeping and what can help with sleeping. I talk a little bit about doctors and the kind of attitude that doctors should have. And I think a lot of doctors have that, but I think some fall short. I feel like in today's world, too often doctors are kind of pushed into a corner of being well-educated technicians, but not really being a healer in the sense that Hippocrates or Galen or other great physicians of the past thought about physicians. So
yeah, I like that you touch base on that, Dr. Mike, because a coworker and we were just discussing that today, actually. Functional medicine, you're starting to see more and more things about functional medicine. And it's because functional medicine, they want to get to the root of the problem, right? They just don't want to mask it up with, here, take this prescription and you'll stop hurting, and then if you check on that prescription, and again, I'm not knocking all drugs because there are some that are very well needed for individuals, right? My wife has to take a few that helps her maintain, right? So she doesn't go off on a whole different level.
Yeah.
But you take some of these prescriptions, and when you do your research, you find out that it starts causing so many other health factors. And we were talking about how crazy it is that insurance will cover the doctor visits and different prescriptions and things like that. But when it comes to natural stuff and functional medicine, they don't want anything to do with it. So I don't know if that's how far in depth you go in your chapter about that. I just find it very interesting what you said, because I think more and more Americans are starting to open their eyes to functional medicine, and you're starting to see some of the old-fashioned stuff coming back.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't address that very directly in what I wrote here, but I do talk a little bit about what it means to be a physician. And throughout history and throughout different cultures, being a physician, being a healer is a really privileged position in a society, in a culture. Um, and I kind of think it should be. In a lot of cultures, it's close to being a priest. And in a lot of cultures, being a healer and being the religious leader overlaps a lot. And I don't suggest that we do that in our Western medicine way of doing things, but I do suggest that being a healer is different than being a banker or a lawyer or an accountant. It's a kind of a profession that ought to be set apart. So that's kind of my orientation on it. I think the reality, what I've observed, is that because of the pressures that doctors are under, both to pay off their very large student loans and other things, they end up getting pigeonholed in a business, in a healthcare business, where they are part of a product line. The first time I heard the word product line when I was in my work at the university, I kind of cringed and bristled a little bit, because that is out of character with what I think being a physician is about. Now, I understand that my idealistic way doesn't fit very well in today's world, but I think we ought to hold on as much as we can to what it means to be a physician. And when you have a physician that understands that it is a sacred responsibility to be a physician, that's a doc that maybe you ought to hang on to.
Yeah.
And who can, like you're talking about, Al, they can do more than just treat the surface of the problem. They can really help treat what's at the root of the problem, or kind of take care of your soul as well as your infection or whatever it might be.
Yeah, agreed.
So moving on from there, I don't want to get too bogged down here, but I talk about that. So some of these are just kind of mundane topics that I don't think are very exciting necessarily, but I think they're kind of the foundation for some good health. Moving on, I talk about recreation and how recreation is an important part of health. And I think it's easy for people to dismiss recreation and say that that's not a worthwhile pursuit. But I think there's plenty of evidence to argue against that. I think it ought to be properly dosed. And I certainly see people who, in my opinion, maybe overdose on recreation and neglect some other important parts of life. But we need to have that. Discipline is something else that I talk about. Finding balance in life. I spent a chapter on that. Responsibility. I think it's an interesting era that we live in, where if I'm having a problem, it clearly is not my fault. It's somebody else's fault. We live in a time of and I need to be careful how I say this, because there are true huge injustices that happen in the world. But even as I say that, I think we live in a time that invites people to step into the role of being a victim rather than being a victor. And I think responsibility, I look at responsibility in a couple of ways. Is we have a responsibility to each other and to behave civilly in society. And we have a responsibility for ourselves to accept ownership of where we are in life, and if we want to make a change, it's up to us to make those changes. I think that fits a lot with what you talk about, Al, with addiction and
Yeah, I
and
was I was actually just going to say that, I mean, they teach a lot in recovery, and I've not gone into recovery. However, I've supported my wife in a lot of her recoveries, and of course I've interviewed hundreds of people on the show that, you take responsibility for your own consequences, right? It's and I have really paid attention to this, and I'm glad that you brought this up, Dr. Mike, because addicts, they will justify anything they can to use again, right? And it doesn't matter, again, the addiction. I'm just not talking drugs or alcohol.
yeah,
It could be gambling, it could be sex, it could be eating, whatever it may be.
right.
We always justify it, and by doing that, it's putting that blame on someone else, right? So, Dr. Mike, you just hurt my feelings in a way, and it bothers me that you think that way. So there's my reason to go do what I really want to do, because I'm not taking responsibility for my own consequences and my own choices. And then if I overdose and come out of my overdose, I'm not blaming me. I'm going to blame that I was ticked off at Dr. Mike because of what he said at me. And I have really been keeping a really close eye on people that I associate with and people outside, just by listening to other conversations. And it may sound like I'm eavesdropping on everyone, and I'm not. It's just certain conversations. And I have found myself doing the exact same thing, where I'm like pretty ticked off today because so and so did this at work, right? Well, it's my choice that I got ticked off. They didn't do anything. I chose to put the blame on them when it's me that's actually having those feelings come through.
Yeah. It's a huge issue, and it's an uncomfortable topic, really, when we dig deep into it. One of the books I have on my bookshelf over here is called Existential Psychotherapy. And in that book, the author talks about different existential issues like death, or like responsibility and freedom, and finding meaning in life. I think these are important topics. He spends 60 pages, single-spaced pages, talking about responsibility. So it's a topic that I don't cover in that kind of depth in what I wrote about it, but I do acknowledge that we need to kind of quit being eager to be victims and own our lives, even if we get kicked around a little bit. Now, I do acknowledge there are some serious injustices in the world, and I don't in any way want to defend those injustices.
Yeah.
But there always has been, and I think there always will be, at least in the current state of the world. And I think if we choose to be a victim, we are going to limit our opportunities in life. So that may sound a little Pollyannish, but
No, I love it. That was very well said. Thank you.
I did reflect a little bit on one of my experiences early on in life, where I was a high school football player, and it was halftime, and I think we were losing at this point. And in the halftime meeting with the coach, where you know how halftime works out, the coach usually gives a little pep talk and a little encouragement and makes a few adjustments. This halftime wasn't like that. I remember my coach, his veins were bulging in his neck, his face was red, he was throwing chalk all over the locker room, and he wrote 3 names on the board. He wrote three numbers. He wrote my number and the number of 2 other players. And in a not very polite way, he invited us to be a little more responsible for what was going on the football field. And the way the story went from there is, of course, we went out the second half and we trounced the other team, and we were victorious. And following that, we went on to win the state championship. That was a few weeks later, before we got into the state playoffs and won the championship. But being reminded of our responsibility did prove effective. And I reflected on those 3 players, myself being one of them. One of them ended up starting for an NFL team, He played defensive end, and he won a Super Bowl and had several good years in the NFL as a starter. The other one was All-State in football, and I don't recall that he played in college, but he was an outstanding athlete and was All-State. And the third one of us, that would be me, ended up struggling through the rest of high school and then getting into medical school eventually and becoming a psychiatrist. So it gave me an opportunity to reflect on experiences like that.
Yeah. You needed to become a sports psychiatrist, because then those two could have been your clients.
Yeah, they could have.
Yeah.
That would have been a good deal. Maybe it's not too late.
Right.
I'm not quite sure how to get into that, but continuing on down the list, I do spend a chapter talking about recognition of mental illness. And in that chapter, I just talk about how amazing our brains really are. There are like 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. That would take you a lifetime to count all of those. We have close to that number of neurons in our brains. So about 100 billion, the estimates vary. Some research shows maybe a little less than that, but somewhere probably between 80 and 100 billion neurons. Those neurons each make about 10,000, on average, 10,000 synaptic connections with other neurons. And maybe people don't know what a synaptic connection is, but that's where a lot of the action is in the brain, where nervous impulses, thoughts, or reactions to things can be modulated or propagated or stopped depending on what happens in those synapses. So you've got 100 billion neurons, each on average making 10,000 synaptic connections. And then you've got a whole long list of neurotransmitters that also add to the complexity of the system. And that's just scratching the surface of how complex our brains are. And it makes sense to me to consider that with that complexity, things may run a little off track once in a while, and sometimes in a big way, and you end up with a serious mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or major depression or some of the other problems that we deal with a lot in psychiatry. And I think it's okay to acknowledge the reality, the physical reality of those things running off track, and also the reality that treatment is helpful. Now, treatment in any part of medicine is not 100% effective. We don't always get, whether you're talking to a cardiologist or a nephrologist or a psychiatrist, results are not always 100%. But we do pretty well in psychiatry in helping people. The Surgeon General wrote a report a couple of decades ago looking at mental illness and how effective our treatments are. And that was the conclusion he came up with, is that our treatments in mental health practice and psychiatry are equally effective compared to other medical specialties. So, so moving on to topics that I think are a little more interesting, I talked about the need for continued growth as you go through life. I think it's nice when you're young and you graduate from high school or college or whatever to have a sense of accomplishment and completion. But if you stop your growth at that point, you're missing out. You're not going to be what I call life fit. An example of that is one of the professors I had. My first chemistry teacher in college was a man named Henry Eyring. A lot of people know Henry Eyring, but this is the father of the Henry Eyring who's the leader in the LDS Church. World-renowned chemist, great guy. I had the opportunity to see him in other settings as well. And I don't recall how old he was when he finally passed away, but throughout his life, he was busy doing new things, learning new things, helping more people, and just being a real decent guy who didn't stop when he got done with whatever level of achievement he wanted to attain. So anyway, continued growth is one of those important things in life. I'm dominating too much here, Al, I apologize, but let me just list off the rest of the topics and then we can talk a little bit about it. They talk about the role of relationships and what we can do to enhance relationships. We all want to have that working well in our lives, talk about meaning, finding meaning in life. I referred to some of the existential issues before, and meaning is a huge existential issue. We need to have a sense of purpose and what our lives are about.
Yeah.
I talk about what I call a transcendental sense, and I talk about that in two different ways. One is having a sense that there's more to reality than what we can perceive with our senses. And that is a reality. I mean, the electromagnetic spectrum, we can only see a little bit of that. That's what we see in visible light. But there's gamma rays and X-rays and infrared rays and ultraviolet rays that are all outside of our perception. You could say the same thing about sound waves. That there's ultra low or ultra high sounds that we don't hear. Other animals might hear those, but like dogs can hear dog whistles, but we can't hear them. My point is that there's a whole part of reality that we don't see with our usual senses. We can see some of that with the help of technology, but even that, there are so many amazing things going on around us and out in the universe that we just have really no idea about.
Yeah.
So I make the argument that we should be able to understand that there's more to reality than what we can recognize. The other part of transcendence that I think is hugely important and really to me represents what it means to be life fit is the ability to look beyond our own interests, to put our own interests secondary to something bigger than that. That can get into religious issues as well. I think Buddha said something about looking beyond yourself and in the interest of others. And certainly Christ said things relating to that. Part of that is kind of the attitude that I think that heroes have. A hero is someone who is going to do the right thing and help other people, even at their own expense. And that's part of what I mean by self-transcendence.
Yeah.
And then I just have a couple of chapters after that, trying to wrap things up. And it's been a nice exercise for me to try to put all this down on paper. And I'd hope that it would be of value to someone else at some point as well. So
I do believe it would be, because you've got a lot of great topics in there, and the way I'm seeing it, Dr. Mike, is every topic that you have down in that book is what we go through every day in life. I mean, you put a lot of thought behind this, and that's just how I'm picturing it. Is what is it that we go through in life, right? What problems do we have? What issues do we have? What struggles do we have within? What struggles do we have from out in the 3D world? And it seems like you've been able to grab every single one of these and put it in a chapter, and I'm sure help all of us understand a lot more of our life. And I did not realize we had 100 billion neurons. I mean, I know our good friend Nick Smith from A Tribe of Giants said, you can unplug a neuron and plug it into something different. It's up to you, right? And it may take a little time before that current to finally subside in this old one while the other one's building. I had no clue we had that flipping many. That is so interesting. I mean, if it took us a lifetime to count that many stars, or more than a lifetime, who the hell counted this in our brain?
it was probably some pre-med student somewhere,
right?
Who was given the assignment to you count all these neurons until you're done.
Yeah, right. Well, I hope they gave him an A in the course. That's
they should have. I actually think he's still counting somewhere, but
yeah, probably. And another thing that you brought up too that is big for me, and that's meaning. You said you had a chapter in there about meaning, and the first thing when you said that, when you first mentioned it, the words that popped up in my head was, what's your why?
Yeah.
And that's a good book, by the way. There is a book called What's Your Why? I believe that's the title of it. I have read it. It's a very, very good book. And I remember after reading it, every day I was waking up searching for it. I mean, seriously, I was searching for it. What is my why? And it took me until, gosh, just past my mid 50s, right? Probably a couple years ago when I finally realized what my why was. And it goes to show it's never too late to find your why,
Yeah.
even if you don't understand it at an early age.
I think part of the challenge with that, Al, is that people might be, 40 or 50 years old and thinking, I don't really have a clear sense of meaning. I don't know. I don't have that sense of why so much. Um, and my observation in life is I think there are some people who have that early on, who come into life kind of with a course that's mapped out for them and a sense, they have their own sense of what they need to do. Um, I think some of our great leaders have been like that, but I also think most of us don't have that clear sense. I think it is something that comes into focus as we live a life focused on high ideals. I think our sense of why, our sense of meaning will come into focus eventually. And it may not be something like I need to cure cancer. I mean, that'd be nice if I could do that. But it may just be I need to be a decent person to people around me.
Yeah.
The world has enough garbage already. I don't need to add to that. I need to be a little bit of a light to the world, or lift someone's burden.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be anything huge, right? Like you
It
said,
doesn't, no.
curing cancer or some other huge thing. I mean, we're already sending spaceships to Mars and different things like that. It can be something even so minute that still makes a huge change in this world and in your life in general.
Yeah, yeah. I think meaning is important. And you're familiar with another book, I'm sure, called Man's Search for Meaning, written by Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, we were just talking about that last weekend at some dinner with some friends. And
Yeah,
matter of fact, we sent them what the book looked like because our Fred's wife was going to order it.
yeah, yeah. It's a good book. Dr. Frankl died probably 15 or 20 years ago now, I think, but he went through some tremendous, horrendous experiences during World War II, being born I think he was born in Germany. He had a successful medical practice going until the war started, and he was a Jew and ended up in a concentration camp. And his observation, I mean, I can't do justice to his book here, but part of his observation was that the people who survived that experience were more likely to have a sense, to use your word, Al, they had a sense of why, they had a sense of meaning. And the people who lost their purpose, their meaning, they didn't, it wasn't long after that before they were dead.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are a lot of people who died no matter what in that horrific situation, but
And I got a question here for you, Dr. Mike. We talked about, or you mentioned how some people find their why at an earlier age, or some has had their why mapped out for them, right? I mean, I've known people like that said they're going to grow up to be a doctor, and they took every step they needed to take to get to be a doctor,
yeah,
right? That was their why.
yeah,
And I could be wrong, but I don't. However, I don't think I am. It's also, I think, how we were brought up, and I'm not putting the blame on our parents, our grandparents, our great grandparents, right? They were brought up in a way. No one gave us a manual how to be the exceptional parent. We learned from our relatives from before, right? And the generations just keep going, and there's some things we've put away and there's other things we've added on. I was brought up in a way that you go and you get an education. If you don't want to go to college, you go to the military. If you don't go to the military, you get a job and you stay at that job till it's time to retire, right? Basically, throughout all my years of growing up and living at home until I left at the age of 17 after I graduated, I basically watched my parents go through the same routine for all those years. Now, of course, my early years, 1 through 2 or 3 or 4, or whatever it was, I may not know everything at that time. As I got older, though, it was the same way. There was never a variance. You did not step off the path. You stayed on the path, because if you step off the path, uh-uh, that's harmful. This is the way you go. And I was telling a friend last week that if I would have known what other life was out there, what other options were out there, I was a risk taker. I was curious. It's like whenever I went hiking, or like when I first got old enough to hunt, I was one of those guys that walked up a canyon and looked across, saw another canyon, went, "Oh, damn, that one looks good. I'll probably find a deer in that one," right? And I went and hit that canyon.
Yeah,
Or I'd see something else and I'd go off over to that one
yeah,
because my curiosity. However, I stayed on that same path, and it took me until I lost my job in 2009 to start realizing how many flippin' paths and roads and destinations there were to go down. And it just, I don't blame my parents, because, and I hope people don't think I am, because they just did what they were taught, right? They
right.
just did what they knew, because they didn't know any different either.
No, it kind of worked for them.
It worked for them. And here I am now. I mean, I I was ridiculed by my father because I chose to jump off that path, and I was the black sheep of the family because I chose to do that. And I've even had other people say, why don't you just do this?" Well, it's because I'm back on that path and I don't want to be there again. I may fail out here, I may trip and fall. It's okay, because I know another path is going to come up and I'll just stand up, brush myself off, and go down that path. But man, too much of my life was going down that same path. And I learned things. It wasn't a waste of time. I am a true believer, nothing is a waste of time. However, I believe I could have been a lot further in my
Yeah,
life, and maybe had found my why sooner if I would have varied.
yeah, maybe. Um, I I'm kind of a believer, and maybe it's easy for me to say, but I think the meaning in our life probably in a lot of cases has less to do with our occupation or our profession or our bank account numbers, and
Yeah, I
more to
agree.
do with our character and how we treat other people.
Hmm.
Um, and again, that's easier said than done. I'm certainly guilty of not treating everybody the way they ought to be treated. I hope not to offend too often, but certainly I'm capable of it. But I think we have the part of life that I think is important, which is, how do we make our money? How do we keep shelter? How do we keep ourselves fed? But I think even more important than those things is what kind of person are we, and how are we interacting with others? How do we impact the world wherever we are?
Right.
There's not too many Elon Musks around who have the financial power to make huge changes, but we all can influence the world around us in a favorable way. We've talked a lot about being cheerleaders for people, especially in the realm of addiction, where a lot of people are sincerely struggling to get away from uh, that uh, problem that has ensnared them, and they don't need people taking pot shots at them. They need people cheering them on. And
Absolutely.
to your credit, Al, you've taken this on. I don't know if this is exactly what you would say your meaning is or your why is, but you've, with your podcast and with the other things you're involved with, you've helped a lot of people who have needed a cheerleader to get them out of this. And it's a wonderful thing you're doing.
Well,
So
thank you. And I'm sure you have done the same thing, Dr. Mike, throughout your career. I'm sure that you have really helped a ton of people to open their eyes. And I'm glad that you brought it up, because the way I explained it probably did seem like career wise. However, you're 100% right. It's not right. It's just that there's so many different options, and I have the past 14 years, I have really got to know who Al Richards really is as an individual, right? I've turned out to be, I'm not the greatest by all means, and I've got a long ways to go. I'm going to continue to work on myself until God calls me home.
Sure.
However, I'm a lot better than what I used to be. So much more, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I didn't stay stuck in that path for another 14 years. I'm grateful that, and basically, it probably would have happened if I wouldn't have got knocked off my horse. Right? I got so comfortable riding my horse. I thought this is just how things are going to go, and luckily I
Yeah.
got bucked off, and I
Yeah.
had no other choice to jump on another horse.
Well, I talk about that a little in the chapter on responsibility about getting bucked off the horse and getting back in the rodeo.
I
And
love it.
you've done that.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So let's show our listeners your book again. Put that book, and I know it's not available. However, it's going to be, right?
It is. I'm actually trying to send it off to some agents to see if I can attract any interest. I have a friend and some associates that are associated with publishing things, and maybe I could get it done that way. If nothing else, I could get it available on Amazon, Kindle Direct Books, or something like that, which is not a bad way to go, and I could make it readily available to people. And
Yeah.
so I just need to, like my high school football coach would say, well, no, I will not quote what he would say because that would be inappropriate.
Yeah,
But
this
but
is
he would give me some
PG-13.
motivation to make it happen. So
I love it.
anyway, it's fun to talk about, Al, and I'd like to think it could do some good for some people. I kind of shift in the last part of the book away from talking about individuals and talking more about the last chapter. I've entitled it just a brief history of the world as I understand it. And I start with, I say, just one more thing. So I'm quoting Peter Falk from Colombo. And I write, history as I understand it, abbreviated version. Over the long history of human civilization, much has been accomplished. A while back, actually quite a long time ago, humankind survived, at least some of them, by outwitting their predators and outrunning their peers. Life was not easy or safe. So I kind of start there and run through the history in 2 pages. So it's not a unabridged history of the world, but it's my brief take. But I conclude with talking a little bit about technology and how we've advanced and how our technology could lead to good things or maybe not such good things. And what I wrote here at the end is perhaps the next major societal advance will come in the form of finally learning to get along, finally learning to lay down our weapons, finally learning to let go of enmity. Enmity is that feeling of antagonism and competition against everybody. Can you imagine a world immersed in love, joy, compassion, kindness, humility, charity, benevolence, and service? Perhaps that is the next major leap for mankind after we have fully satisfied our appetites for gadgets, technology, and ease. Maybe then we, as individuals and as societies, will be ready for this final giant leap for mankind. I hope so. So
I love it. That's really good. And let's hope that's where the world's going, right? There's just so much crap going on out there. And it's for those that watch a lot of the media, it's not everywhere. There's a lot of good out there. There really is. There's a ton of good people, a lot of loving people. It's just not all bad.
there is a lot of good. Um, and I don't know where I heard it lately. I thought it was an interesting thought about aliens invading other planets. And I don't want to get off onto a tangent about UFOs and everything right now. But the thought that I heard, which I kind of agree with, is that an alien visiting our planet would likely be benevolent. They would likely not be here to harm. And the thought that came with that is that in order to advance to that level where they could travel intergalactically or whatever, they'd have to have rid themselves from that enmity, that hostility, that all the nasty things that are part of the world that you and I are both aware of, for society or for their civilization to really advance to the point where they could do these amazing intergalactic travels or whatever. They'd have to be motivated by beneficence, by feeling of service rather than conquering.
Yeah.
And that gives me reassurance. So when I see strange things in the night sky, I'd like to think that they're benevolent.
I would have to agree with you on that, Dr. Mike. So no, you are not alone. I'm a huge fan of Ancient Aliens, and I watch a lot of things, and they believe that too, right? I mean, they really do. And there's been signs, there's been proof of certain visitors shutting down nuclear warheads and things like that. So there's something else out there. There really is. And again, we won't go on a tangent because I could get in there and I can talk on that probably for a while. And
Well, maybe that'll be the next program.
there we go. This is not an alien show, so, so we'll be safe. Dr. Mike, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And I just want to say, Candace Platter, if you get a chance to watch this video, man, we hope you get feeling better. We'll have you on the show again. This would have been your third time on the show, and we love what you do, and we love the support that you give to families that battle addiction or families that have loved ones that battle addiction. So Candace, we wish you the best, and we wish you a quick recovery. And you were missed today. However, Dr. Mike filled in and just did an amazing job. So again, thank you for everything tonight. I greatly appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Al. You take care.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to be signing off here. Keep an eye out for more of our shows. We've got some really good guests that are be coming on, and another episode will be coming out tomorrow, Thursday. And it's going to be a good one. Our good friend Amber Bride is going to be talking about the importance of showing ourselves grace and compassion. Very, very good show, and we had a really good talk about it. So again, Dr. Mike, thank you again for everything. Thanks to all our listeners, all our supporters. We love and appreciate y'all. You guys have a wonderful night. Take care and be safe.